Happy Sunday and happy holidays. I hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. On tonight, we're in for a special treat. Not quite a Thanksgiving treat, but a special treat all the same. So, our guest this evening, my first interaction with them, I believe, was in an IRS focus group. And I remember the input that this person was giving and how it caught my attention. The reason for that is because, online, whether it's tax professional world, just professionals in general, everybody has an opinion, but it's not always backed up by their experience. And when they share their opinion, they're not always advocating for other people or how things are affecting other people. They're usually just belly aching about something that is going to only affect them. So, in this interaction, this conference call, as I'm listening to this person and how passionate they were about helping things improve, not just for us as tax professionals, but also for taxpayers, I was like, huh. So after that, I went and I looked this person up and I saw that this is just part of who they are by the different things that I saw them posting online. And then I even followed up, not with them. If you all haven't learned yet, I do my homework. I followed up with other people to see who this person was, and everyone I asked spoke very highly of tonight's guest. So, for episode 23, I would love for you to help me welcome Miss Phyllis Jo Kubey to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Timalyn. It is great to be here. And I have to say, that is the best introduction I have ever had. Thank you so much. That's amazing. But I remember that call too. And it's like, I kind of had the same feeling. It's like, oh, here's someone I don't know. Because, I kind of knew a lot of people. It's like, who's this new person? And she is knowledgeable and articulate. And it's like, good.
Well, I appreciate those kind words from you. And the funny thing is, the more research I did, because if I like you, I'm going to research you, make sure I want to be associated with you. I found out that you're a fellow writer. I also found out that you had a former career in the fine arts, which we can talk about in a little bit. But again, the way you were advocating for people who weren't even on the phone is what really, really stood out to me. And I was like, I like her. So it's definitely my honor to have you on the podcast. Before I even launched the first episode, I had reached out and life happened, but I'm glad that you're here now.
Yeah, life sure did happen. And I'm also glad that I'm here.
So, Phyllis Jo, I could talk to you probably all day, but I'm sure our guests want us to go ahead and get into the meat of the episode. So, the first question that I ask everyone who joins me on the show is, how did you find out about the enrolled agent designation and what made you decide to sit for the exam?
So that's a really good question. And I honestly don't remember a single moment when I found out about the EA designation, but I'm pretty sure that when I first started out in the tax preparation business, which for me was kind of an accidental career, that I did not know what an EA was. Um, but I definitely remember the experience that made me say, okay, it's time to sit for the EA exam. And I guess I had been preparing tax returns for about 10 years at that point. And I had a client who had been audited several years before, and I had also prepared his return. And it was just a regular office audit with an IRS tax compliance officer. And we breezed through that with no change. It was no problem. And then a few years later, lo and behold, the same taxpayer is audited again. And this time it was with a revenue agent. And it was my first outing with a revenue agent at the IRS. And he was very nice and very knowledgeable. But to make a long story short, basically we came down to an impasse where he said, look, if I allow this, I'm just going to disallow something else. So we've got a small dollar amount here, just agree to it and let's call it a day. And I was incensed. And of course, the first thing I realized, because apparently I did know enough then about the EA credential to know that I could not, as an unenrolled preparer, take this case to appeals. And so, eventually I discussed it with the client. He's, let's just do it. And so that was that. And I thought, okay, this is the time, because I do not want to be in this position. I do not want my clients to be in this position where I cannot take them to higher levels of negotiation with the IRS. So I decided to take the exam, and I did use a study course at the time. This was kind of ancient history. It was back in 1994, I guess, was when I was studying for it. And it was a good course. I think it was an NSA sponsored course, but it was very well put together. And, I got all the IRS publications, and I studied and I studied and I studied. And at that time, it was a 4-part exam, and you took it in person. It was in some federal building in Lower Manhattan. And I remember going down there, and this was before computers. It was before smartwatches, anything like that. But I remembered that they actually made me turn in my watch, which was just like an analog regular watch, at the door. And they gave us a couple of pencils and a few sheets of scratch paper. And so we had to do all the math in our head, or not in our head, but on the scratch paper. There were no calculators or anything else like that. So it was 4 parts, and I think we did 2 parts on one day, afternoon, morning, and then the next day we came back and did the other 2 parts, morning and afternoon. And so very happily, I did pass all 4 parts, and I forget how many months it was that I was waiting for those results, but I got them, and I was so happy. And then I'm not sure whether the National Association of Enrolled Agents had a table at the exam. Somehow I knew about NAEA, and it just made no sense to me to become an enrolled agent without becoming a member of NAEA. So I think I finally got the EA credential in 95. And then I looked back, and I had joined NAEA in 1996. So I've been a member for a long time, and of course NYSSEA as well. Yeah. So that was it. And that moment when I realized that there were things that I could not do to help my clients if I were not an enrolled agent, it was like, okay, that's it.
Gotcha. So, number one, I'm glad that they made an update to when you receive your test scores, because our poor friends who just sat for the tax court practitioner exam, I'm like, you have to wait months for the results.
Yeah, there's so much not knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. But I love the connection that you made too with NAEA having a table there at the exam or having a table somewhere. So you're able to find out about them because people will ask me why join NAEA, which I get from the perspective of what's in it for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm summarizing what you said. You don't know what you don't know until you get there,
That's
right?
so true. Yeah. I mean, and I would say I've been different gradations of an NAEA member because when I first joined, I was a pure, I call it a checkbook member. I wrote
Mhm.
a check for my dues and I got the publications and I consumed whatever there was to consume from NAEA, but I don't think I went to any of the in-person events, except that I did sign up pretty early on to do the National Tax Practice Institute. And at that
Okay.
time, that was also in person, and it was on the East Coast. So it was usually like in Arlington or Alexandria, somewhere in Virginia, close to DC. So, and that was, did level 1 year, and then level 2 the next, level 3 after that. And there's actually a really funny anecdote with my first going to NTPI. So I was pretty convinced it was the first time I'd ever really gone to a gathering of tax professionals. And I was pretty sure everybody was going to be boring and that it really wouldn't be much fun at all. And so I got there the day before, checked into the hotel, and then that evening, it was a beautiful evening, and I went out to the pool and, got into the hot tub. And there were, a bunch of other people in there. I didn't know who they were, but they were super fun and super friendly. And we all got to talking and made friends. And of course, it turned out that they were all people that were there to attend the National Tax Practice Institute. So my initial impression that people would be boring and uninteresting. I mean, I don't even know why I thought that, but it certainly wasn't true. And I must say, over the years, just going to various NAEA events and meeting so many people from all over the country has been incredible. So after years of being a checkbook member and then attending the NTPI, at some point, I think it was actually on the state and local level, our New York State Society started an online forum, and it's still going today. It's a Google group, so it's
Mm.
kind of old school technology, but it works. And at the time, the leaders wanted to have something that people could do. They didn't have to be part of a special platform. If you could email, you could be part of this Google group. So I signed up, and all of these people were posting, and I thought, my goodness, these people are so knowledgeable, and not only knowledgeable, but generous and funny and resourceful. And everybody had, not one citation, but 2 citations. Thing. And I was just like, wow, who are these people? And so I resolved that after that tax season, I was going to meet some of these people. Oh, and then at some point, after lurking in the group for a long, long time, I thought, well, I could answer a question or two. And the president at the time reached out and said, well, who are you? Where did you come from? And, and so it kind of drew me in. So I went to a local meeting and met a bunch of the people. And then I went to my first NYSSEA conference and got to know even more people and really loved the experience. And then someone reached out to me and said, would you consider running to be a director at large for NYSSEA? I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And so I did, and I was elected. So I served on the board and then eventually moved up into officer positions and second VP, first VP, president, and then immediate past president. And as of this past October, I am now a true past president. So so many years on the board at NYSSEA, I'm now off the board, but I'm still on a bunch of committees and still really involved. And then for NAEA, people had been reaching out to me for years, mostly from the government relations end of things and saying, oh, would you help us out? Would you be on this committee? And I was like, no, 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 I don't have time. No. Every year they were so persistent. I was like, no. And then I attended my first fly-in DC, which is where the NAEA members come in and we get a little bit of on our feet training, and we go and meet with our representatives and our senators, and we present issues that are important to enrolled agents and get to know them and they us. So that was my first time, and I was so jazzed about that experience. It was so cool. I mean, you've been there, so you know how great it is. And then at the reception after, the president at the time, Lonnie Gary, came up and put his arm around me and said, would you consider serving on the NAEA PAC steering committee? And I had been a PAC contributor, and maybe I'd had a glass of wine or two, so it sounded like a good idea. And so I was like, yes, I will. And so I got really involved with the PAC and chaired what used to be called the PAC Steering Committee for many years. And then I took a little hiatus for a while. I was serving on the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council and kind of had to lighten my load a bit. But now I'm back on the newly reconstituted NAEA PAC board, and I became chair this past January. So I'm back in the saddle with NAEA PAC. And I have to say that getting involved with NAEA and NYSSEA, it just really changed my life. First of all, I learned so much about leadership and working with others. I've always been a solo practitioner, so I hadn't had the experience of managing staff or, really working closely with other people. So that really gave me some great experience. And that also gave me incredible experience when I did serve on the ERSAC, the Advisory Council, because half of the job in that group was learning how to work with people. And we worked on a consensus model. So, we had to, if there was an issue that we felt strongly about that we wanted to include in our annual report, we had to get everybody else on board. And, that was really a valuable experience. It also, my gosh, it taught me how to run a meeting, keeping on time. We'd have people lined up on the phone, at like 10-minute intervals. And it's like, okay, we're done with this, on to the next thing. So that was kind of a long story, but getting involved and attending the professional organization events, it's just so special. And I've belonged to other organizations and I've attended some of their events, but NAEA, of course, is the only professional organization that is about advocating for EAs. And it's the one that won my heart.
Yeah, I appreciate the story because it adds more color and we can actually see and understand. But you also answered where I was going. So I appreciate that too, because when people ask me, why join NAEA? Like you said, it's the only organization for us. But even your disposition and eyes lit up as you talked about your transition from being a checkbook member to getting involved. You
Mhm.
get out of an organization what you put into it. So if you're going to be a lurker or a bystander, maybe this isn't the organization for you to join. I want to go back to something else you mentioned though too. Um, I made note stay away from Tony and Phyllis Jo when we're talking about the pack when they're passing out wine at the reception. But thank you for the work that you do with that. We had Tony Frezza on maybe close to 20 episodes ago, and he talked about how he ended up getting involved with the pack. For a listener who maybe this is their first episode, can you explain what the NAEA pack is in the work that they do?
Sure. So a PAC is a political action committee. So, you've probably heard about various PACs in the news, and usually in a not very positive light. And whenever I talk about the PAC, I say if anyone had ever told me I would be involved with a political action committee, I would have thought they were insane, because I'm not a particularly political person. I don't particularly love the way our political system works, or lack
Mhm.
of. But what I what I learned about our PAC is that it's very special. We support the election campaigns of members of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. So we only donate to campaign for the tax writers. And so we're bipartisan or nonpartisan. We try to support as evenly as possible Republicans, Democrats, sometimes there's an independent or two. And
Mhm.
I've always said, if Attila the Hun is on one of those committees, we're going to support him or her, because we need to have a voice in how the tax laws are being crafted. And those committees are also responsible for IRS oversight. So there's a big component of that. But I think I kind of skipped over an important part, is what a political action committee does is it raises money. And in our case, we can only raise money from NAEA or NAEA affiliate members. We raise money, we accumulate those funds, and we give donations to the election campaigns of the tax writers. And the way that works is we don't just mail them a check. It's usually associated with a fundraising event that the legislator will sponsor. So they'll send out an invitation, and we'll decide, as part of our duty is on the PAC board, is to decide uh, to whom to contribute. And
Mhm.
we usually make a spend plan at the beginning of the year, looking at the composition of the tax committees, who's retiring, who's just coming on, who's an old friend, stuff like that. And I mean, it's a living document. It changes with the political landscape during the year, but that's kind of our blueprint. And so one of our GR staff will attend these fundraising events. And it's an opportunity to talk one-on-one with the legislator, with their staffers. So it really gives them a chance to get to know us. And usually there's no particular issue or agenda that's being fostered in those social gatherings. It really is more general. And it also really gets out the word about who enrolled agents are, because there are members of other PACs attending. And so we might be in the room with people from Coca-Cola, from Alcoa, from the AICPA, and all sorts of, organizations all over the country. And so when they go back to their home offices and people ask them, well, who was at this event? They say, oh, the National Association of Enrolled Agents. And then they're able to tell their people what an enrolled agent is, what we do, and why we're important. So I've become very, very passionate about the NAEA PAC, and I love to talk about it, and I could go on for days, but you probably want to talk about some other things.
Well, I appreciate that background because the work that the PAC does is important. But I think sometimes when people hear about it, they're just hear money, money, money. And just like in business, it takes money to start and run a business.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes money to get into certain doors to extend your network. And then, as you just explained it, essentially create other disciples and messengers to tell who we are and the work we do.
Yeah,
So,
it's a way of building relationships on Capitol Hill that really isn't possible through other means. I mean, can you get a meeting with a legislator without, having any PAC involvement? Of course. But, the fact that you've literally broken bread with these people and have gotten to know their staff, it's just a little bit easier. And,
mhm,
like with everything else, you're often more comfortable and more apt to be receptive if you're talking to somebody that you know.
absolutely. So, again, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to go back, I was going to say a little bit, maybe a lot of it. So I think you said you were preparing taxes for 10 years prior to taking the EA exam.
Mhm.
So, first, let's start with this. How did you even transition into a career with taxes?
So that's a really interesting question, and I call it the strangest life detour that I've ever taken. So my background is in music. I actually come from a family of two symphony musicians. Both of my parents were bassoonists in the Pittsburgh Symphony. So I grew up as an orchestra brat, and I played piano and violin growing up. And then when I was in my early teens, all of a sudden I discovered I had a voice. And so I started taking voice lessons, and eventually I auditioned for and got into Carnegie Mellon University, where I got my undergraduate degree in voice. And I also taught there in the music department for several years. And then, honestly, I was thinking, I was in my 20s, and I was thinking, and I had a good career as a singer in Pittsburgh. I was doing a lot of work, and it was very satisfying. But something was gnawing at me that I didn't want to be an opera singer. And that was kind of the track that I was on. My training was all classical. And I thought, but you know what? I don't want to be sitting here at home when I'm in my 50s saying, oh, if only I'd gone to New York, my life would have been different. And so I
Mhm.
was kind of balancing that with the idea that maybe I want to go in a different direction. So I decided I was going to go to New York. So I auditioned for and got into Juilliard, which was amazing. So I got my master's degree at Juilliard, and I told myself, if after 2 years of being in New York and being at Juilliard, I still feel like I want to make a change, I'll never be able to say, oh, if only. So lo and behold, I got my master's, and I did want to make a change. So I had worked in the registrar's office at Juilliard as my work study job, and I loved that, and they liked me, so they offered me a job, and I took it. And so I was working full time, and I wasn't rehearsing, I wasn't practicing. And I thought, oh, well, I should take a course. And I was literally looking at courses in natural healing. I was almost ready to sign up for macrobiotic cooking. So that was the direction I was going. And then I was on the subway one day and I see this ad, learn H&R Block, learn to prepare your own income taxes. And I thought that's a very practical thing. And I had prepared my own income tax and I thought this will be really good. So I signed up for the course. I think it was, less than $300 at the time, and had no idea what to expect. But the instructor was just marvelous. She was just one of these inspiring teachers. Plus, it wasn't a huge class, but there were like 4 of us in the class that kind of hit it off. One was a CPA who was taking the H&R Block course because he realized he didn't have any training in individual tax, and this was the place to get it. And the other 2 were, kind of from other walks of life, as was I. And so I just loved the class, and I loved, doing the tax returns in the class. And so H&R Block hired me out of the class. And I worked for them weekends and evenings. I was still working at Juilliard. That was my day job. And then eventually I loved working for Block, and it was great, great experience. And I know I'm dating myself here, but we were back in the paper forms and pencil and adding machine age. So it was quite different than, preparing it with computer software now. But it was super fun, and I had a great bunch of people that I worked with in the office. And I just loved, bouncing ideas off of one another. And I was also very surprised at the complexity of some of the people who came in. Their returns were not simple. So that was my baptism by fire. Oh, and I should also mention that I took the tax course in 1985. And as we know, there was a pretty significant tax law change in 1986. So I learned one tax law and started practicing a different tax law. So, I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe this is just the way things go. So I've never really been phased, when we've had huge tax law changes or retroactive, whatever came at me. I felt like that experience kind of prepared me. And so my business plan was that by that time I had started doing more singing again, and I discovered a wonderful freelance singing community in New York that did a lot of the professional choral ensembles and vocal ensembles. So I was doing a lot of work, and I would meet people at these gigs, and they were, oh, well, Phyllis does taxes. Oh, really? Will you do mine? So people were just clamoring. But people didn't want to come to my H&R Block office because it was kind of in a not so great neighborhood at the time. And so I was like, so people want me to prepare their tax returns, but they don't want to come to Block. Maybe I should, do something about that. So at the time, like everybody in New York, I was living in a small apartment with a roommate. And I thought, wow, maybe I could throw my roommate out, use the other room as an office, and write off half of my rent. So that was my business plan. And that's what I did. And, it was kind of ridiculous, but it worked. And I never really had to advertise or market because I met these people through my singing work. And then, they told their friends. And so I always had plenty of work. I think I placed one ad in the Juilliard Journal when I first got started, just so I could show the IRS if they ever wanted to see whether I was really in business or not, just so, I could show that I was. And then there's another kind of funny sidebar to this. I took the tax course in 85, started practicing in 86, and then a year later, I myself got an IRS audit notice for,
Oh no.
for 1985. And to this day, I have no clue because there was nothing on that tax return. I mean, no, not very much income, not very much anything. But I went in and I decided that I was not going to tell the auditor that I had any tax expertise. At the time, I was blonde, so I joked and said I was going to play the dumb blonde. And it was really an eye opener because I got to experience the way the IRS can, I would not intentionally kind of run roughshod over a taxpayer, but just because the taxpayer doesn't know the language and doesn't
Hmm.
know the drill, they're really at a disadvantage. So the first thing he did was, he said, well, there's some income that you haven't reported here. And he had my transcript in front of him. And in New York, where if you rent an apartment, you usually have a security deposit, and that deposit should be in an escrow account, and you should get, statements once a year, and you should get a 1099. But because it's your landlord who's controlling all of that, often you don't. So there was a little bit of interest income. So I was like, okay, fine, add it in. And then I looked over and I was like, oh, wait, but there's interest income there. But look, there's tax withheld too. Don't you have to put that in? And he was like, well, how do you know that? And the whole thing kind of proceeded like that. And he said, well, how do you know all this stuff? And I said, oh, I don't know. I read. And it came down, he wanted to disallow my charitable contribution because he said you can't donate to animal organizations. I was like, oh, really? I was like, is that a book of charitable organizations on your bookshelf behind you? I said, let's pull that down. I said, mine might not be in there because it's a little newer, but let's look up, the ASPCA. That's an animal group. I'll bet that's in there. So it came down. It was kind of like my audit with the revenue agent. He's like, look, we're down to $50 here. Just like accept this and call it a day. And I was like, no. I said, I think I want to go back to my office and I will bring you back the proof that these organizations are legit. And then also at the time, we had, really dating myself, we had something called income averaging, whereas if your income went up significantly in one year, you could kind of do this averaging process. It was Schedule G to mitigate your tax. And so when everything was said and done, I said, oh, wait, don't we have to recalculate the income averaging now if you've changed something? And he just said, all right, no change. So that was a priceless experience. And, I mean, it was funny. And I was lucky because I did call him out on things because I knew. But you see what a disadvantage just the garden variety taxpayer has. And that's why it's so important for them to have access to people like us who can really go in there and advocate strongly and effectively.
Yes, I can only imagine my second year doing returns, receiving a letter myself. I think that would have scared my socks off. But
It was unusual.
starting in 85 had to have been crazy. I always feel sorry for the people who started right before the Tax Cut and Job Act
Yeah,
because they had that big change. Then they had COVID where stuff was just changing on the fly, and we're finding out as the taxpayers, and now social media is a thing. So it's just all crazy. And you were probably like, been here, done this.
I had my trustee. We had a special H&R Block pencil with very soft lead, and the reason was that it duplicated well. So we would actually prepare the tax returns in the office, and then we'd send the completed return down to central processing in Midtown, and they would either send it back assembled for the client, or you would get a pink slip that said, "This return is not perfect." And they wouldn't tell you what was wrong with it. You had to figure it out and send it back. And if it still wasn't perfect, you'd get that pink slip again. So it was really a great way to learn. But I'll tell you, when you're doing stuff on paper, I mean, you know how many forms there are on a tax return, and then you throw in the state return, and my gosh,
New York's is crazy.
New Jersey, we had people, I was in Midtown-ish, so it was kind of people, they started out the year living in New Jersey and working in New York, and then halfway through they switched. And so you had all of these things. So if anybody came in like with another tax form or anything that changed, it was like a life-changing event, because you had to go back and change all of those forms manually, which of course, as you can imagine, is also a recipe for making mistakes, because you might miss one,
Mm-hmm.
suppose a digit or something. So it was
And
quite something.
that's one of the tricky things with technology. And you mentioned it being different using software now. Technology and software is great until it's not. What I've seen is people, and I always hate to say millennials because I feel like millennials get a bad rap. People younger than me, my age younger, even a little bit older, they learn how to do it, but in a software without knowing the foundations and fundamentals. So it's like, well, I don't know like why this isn't flowing, but they don't know how it would work outside of a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be like, well, you know that flows to there. Well, how do you know that? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you still had great training. I took 2 tax courses in college, and it's funny. My teacher was actually a tax attorney, and I got to see him one day at Cracker Barrel, and I was like, "Guess what I'm doing?" He said, "You get to do what I did without going paying as much for school." I said, "Yeah," but our exams we had to prepare returns by hand,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, "Oh, why do we have to do this?" But now, moving forward as a professional, it's crazy because that class was almost 17 years ago. It's like, I thank you, Dr. Krizais, because I actually, although the forms, of course, have changed in schedules, but I know the fundamentals and how things are supposed to function. Um, Something else that you mentioned, which was very interesting, especially because you were transitioning careers here. Jeffrey Thompson, I believe you know him, he's on the NAEA board. He was on last episode and he pointed it out as well. When building your business, you can do it unintentionally, because something I people ask me about a lot is marketing. Where do
Mm-hmm.
you go find clients? We always overlook the communities we're already in. I was
Yeah.
like, why would you want to build a whole new platform to be a subject matter expert and get people to know, like, and trust you? It
Yeah.
was literally the community that you were already in
Absolutely. And
advertising for you.
I mean, social media is amazing. I mean, people find me on the internet. I mean, for many years I didn't even have a website. And one of the reasons I didn't was I wasn't really looking for a lot of new business at that point. And then
Mm-hmm.
I realized I kind of had to have one just as part of my other professional life. So, I did eventually do a website, but, people would find me online, and when I'd interview them, they'd say, "We researched, and, you were the best." And it's like, I don't know how they came to that conclusion, but, it is amazing what's out there now. And of course, none of that was available. I mean, you could go and speak at a local library or do all sorts of things, but like you say, finding that community, and then some of my other sort of sub little niches. One was clergy. Why? Because I met a cantor at a temple where I was singing, and he wanted me to do his taxes. And for those who haven't done clergy taxes, it is one of the strangest areas of tax law. But it's like there are certain fundamental things that are really odd, but once you learn them, it's like, well, you might as well kind of develop a subspecialty in this. So I had a lot of clergy that I did. And then also in the performing arts world, there's a lot of international travel, both US people overseas and people from overseas working over here. So I did a lot of, US residents, citizens and residents living and working abroad, and a lot of the non-resident aliens who were coming here, and concert pianists and things like that who were working with a lot of US orchestras. And that's quite a heavy lift in some areas. So,
Yeah,
going on.
that's cool. I was not trying to work with clergy, and people ask me like, "Oh, you do that because your dad's a pastor." Actually, that's not what happened. I said in different communities, people know what I do. I actually, in 2015, started attending a women's Bible study, and there were a lot of stay-at-home moms and things, and a lot of their husbands. This was them going back to school, but they were in seminary.
Yeah.
So when they got their different internships and things, I was like, huh. There was a point where about one third of my business was clergy
Wow.
because I went to this Bible study, not because I advertised it, not because, and then
Yeah.
if they found out my dad was a pastor, like, oh, so you understand what we're dealing with. And should we do this exemption for not paying Social Security? And like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool that I was just doing life. I didn't have to go start a Facebook page,
Yeah.
post 10 times a day.
Right.
I was just outside
Yeah.
living my life, letting people know what I do.
I found the interesting thing about clergy too was a lot of it was planning and helping them structure their contracts, especially if they
Mhm.
were newly ordained or if they were going to a new job, because wow, the financial operations in churches and temples, they are all over the map. And sometimes they don't do things correctly, and sometimes they're very happy to be educated into how to do things correctly, and
And
sometimes
sometimes they're not.
we're very, very proud to be doing things the way we're doing it, and thank you very much, but we're not changing. So,
Yes, I've had some encounters where the trustee board wanted the pastor to tell them what the housing allowance should be and tell them they needed to talk to me. And I was like, that's a decision that's made
it's kind of
without your
weird.
involvement.
Yes.
Or the church informed the pastor about the opportunity to take the housing allowance, but then gave the pastor a 1099. And I was like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Well, we've been doing it this way for still not how it works.
Yep. Yep.
Fun times for sure.
Yeah.
Um, there's something we haven't brought up that I do want to ask you about. So you mentioned being a solo practitioner, and I have information our listeners don't have here. You retired recently.
I did.
And so you retired from practicing, I guess I should say, and having the firm, but you were still yet very active,
Yes.
advocating with NAEA and, like you said, with the New York State
Mhm.
Society. Being a solo practitioner, what did you have to have in place to be able to have a firm that you could sell? Because this podcast originally was supposed to be people who were thinking about being EAs, but I actually have a lot of current EAs and even seasoned EAs who listen who may be interested in doing the same thing. And I've had people tell me, Well, I don't think I can actually sell it because I'm by myself. So I'm glad you brought up that you're a solo practitioner.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, I've been approached for years by companies that specialize in buying and selling um, tax practices. And I actually, had a nice conversation with one of those companies, and, they sent me all the stuff. And, at the time I wasn't ready quite yet, but I was looking into it. And it was a lot of information that I would have had to provide to them, which was totally doable. And I think one of the things that at least that firm was looking at was, what are my gross receipts? How much money is coming in? And, how much of that would be flowing to the new firm? But, kind of like everything else in my career, it was a little bit of an accident that several years ago, it was at an NAEA event in Las Vegas conference. And someone came up to me and said, "Oh, there's a young man here, and he's from New York, and I wanted to make sure that you guys met, so he would know a fellow New Yorker." So of course we didn't meet in New York; we met in Las Vegas, but we've stayed in touch over the years. And one of the things that I was thinking in terms of selling my practice to the highest bidder was I kind of felt like I had a very particular set of clients. I'd say 80% of them were still in the arts. And, then I had the clergy people. And I kind of felt like if I sold my practice to someone who wasn't as familiar with those industries, that it would just be a disaster. Like that person wouldn't retain my clients, and my clients would be unhappy, and it would just, not be a marriage made in heaven. So I met this gentleman, and I thought he will be a good fit for my clients. And we started talking about it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I started telling my clients 3 years before I retired that I was going to retire in 3 years, that I had identified this person who would take over my practice. And it was kind of an amazing timing thing because he had a job in the corporate tax world, and he had his own practice on the side, and he was thinking that he wanted to give up the corporate job and expand his individual practice. So I said, I might be able to help with that. And so, I mean, I still feel very young. I love, preparing tax returns and representing clients. But I thought this is an opportunity that I can't pass up. And so, it happened, and it feels like it was a very good decision. And we were in very, very close touch over the first year. We met, weekly to discuss various clients. But I'd say the transition was very smooth. We made sure that everybody knew it was happening, that everybody had an opportunity to meet with Jay either um, individually in person or virtually. And so I think everybody felt comfortable. There were a few people who, for various reasons, just decided that they were going in another direction. One client had moved to Canada and had been, doing Canadian returns there with a firm that I had recommended, and they just decided that that firm, could do the U.S. returns too. One person, I'd always told her, if you ever decide to do your own tax returns, you'll be really good at it. And that's what she decided to do. But I'd say we had over 90% that went over in the transition.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, and we did have a written agreement. We did really hammer out the details, and I wanted to make things as doable for my successor as possible. And I'd say maybe the only thing that I might do differently is spend a little bit more time writing up not so much the tax aspects and, kind of the nitty-gritty of each client, but sort of more about their personal preferences and
Mm.
communication styles and stuff like that. Because this to me was like the back of my hand because I've been working with a lot of them for so long. But it really can be different when you are used to one person's style of communicating and all of a sudden you're with someone else and it's like, wait, I like the old way.
But it sounds like you had systems in place for him to go ahead and come in. That transition period went smoothly. I wasn't going to say his name. I was going to say for the people who are seasoned listeners, if the person's name popped in your head, I want you guys to go ahead and share it in the comments because you gave us enough context. He was on maybe
Yeah,
5, 7 episodes ago to
great.
talk about acquiring the firm.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm glad that it's worked out for both of you.
I hope that I haven't heard that episode. I hope that he was as complimentary as I was. But he is just amazing. And I couldn't have found a better fit for my clients. So I feel really good about that.
Yes, he was as complimentary, and you both talked about the networking and how it came about from networking.
Hmm.
So I've received similar emails when I thought my firm wasn't worth a can of paint. And I'm like, why are people emailing me to purchase my
Yeah,
firm?
yeah,
So again, the offer that was the best fit for you and what you wanted to do came from you attending a professional networking event.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, in terms of being a solo practitioner, I mean, in a way, I think it simplified things because had I had employees, and maybe if I've always worked out of my home, so I didn't have an office or anything like that. But I think if you have employees, that's a whole other level of transition
Mm-hmm.
that you really have to pay attention to because those people are really used to you. And your clients might interact with you maybe once or several times during the year. Your employees are with you on a day-to-day basis. So ensuring a smooth transition for them so that they will stay. Then, of course, the other side of that is a lot of people find that one of their employees wants to take over the firm. So that's a natural flow of things.
Yes. Well, Phyllis Jo, I appreciate you being here so much. And I know that you have things to do other than talk to me today. So I'll wrap it up. Before I get to our last question, though, you mentioned being online. If any of the listeners wanted to connect with you online, follow you, because I've told them already that you give out quality content, where can they follow you or connect with you online?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on all the platforms, but I think my most active platform in the tax space is Twitter or X, and I am at PQBEA on that platform. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Phyllis Jo Kubey. And if you want to see some really pretty pictures of New York, you can find me on Facebook. I think I'm Phyllis Jo Kubey EA, or I can't even remember what I am on Facebook, but I kind of have an unusual name, so chances are you'll find me Facebook, Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. Not very active there. So Twitter is where my most of my tech stuff ends up.
Well, thank you. And for the people who are watching this on Spotify and coming soon on YouTube, the Twitter handle and LinkedIn are scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I can attest to the beautiful pictures of New York on Facebook. Something we didn't even get to mention is that you are a faithful walker. And yes, all the pretty places that Phyllis Jo walks in New York, she shares those with those of us that are connected with her on Facebook.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, last question, I think, no, not I think, I'm not going to follow up with anything. If, and looking back at your entire journey as an enrolled agent, if there was anything that you could change, what would that be?
So I am pretty happy with the way things turned out, but I think had had I known then what I know now, I might have looked at growing beyond what I could do as a solo practitioner. In other words, I might have had a different office space, not in my home. I might have had employees and tried to kind of magnify my impact by being able to serve more people.
And just how we started the episode out, we're ending with you advocating and impacting people's lives as a tax professional. Well, that you wrapped it up in a way that I could see, but I wouldn't have guessed you saying. I appreciate the advocacy work, like I said, that you're doing for taxpayers, for enrolled agents just like me, and the impact that I know this episode is going to have on the listeners. So, again, thank you so much for being on here, Phyllis
Oh,
Jo.
thank you so much for having me. This has really been a thrill, and just want to wish you it'll be belated, but a belated happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much. And for our listeners, if you found this episode insightful, definitely go follow. I think it's follow on Twitter, but go follow, connect with Phyllis Jo over on X. If you're interested in starting your own EA firm, you can join my email list at americasfavoriteea.com. I will see you all next Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern.